Okay, yeah, so there's a new graphics card launching. The thing, I mean, if you've been following CES, AMD already announced that this shouldn't be a surprise. It's the 16 gigabyte version of the RX 7600 XT. The RX 7600 XT, it's an 8-lane GPU. Why would you need 16 gigabytes of RAM? It's a little more interesting than that, but we're going to take a look at it on Linux, and specifically with Pop! OS, because it actually works on day one, and that's pretty exciting. So the first RX 7600 XT that I'm going to take a look at is from Sapphire. It's a Sapphire Pulse RX 7600 XT. This is a 16 gigabyte VRAM card with a dual axial cooling. It's 2 slots. It's a little more than 2 slots. It's about 2.1 slots physically. It takes 2 8-pin power connections. It's very well put together by Sapphire. It has a very competent cooling solution. Full back shroud and a little bit of pass-through GPU cooling. It also has some mounting grommets, which will be popular with OEMs and system builders that are looking to integrate this in their builds because you can physically secure the card for shipping or whatever else. The card also doesn't weigh a ton, even though it's fairly powerful, so that's pretty nice. This card is aimed at the market for 1080p and 1440p gaming, but with 16 gigs of VRAM, it's really designed for next generation titles. So AMD is a little bit banking on your FOMO, your fear of missing out, because pretty much no modern AAA title at 1080 and 1440 is going to exceed about 10 gigabytes of VRAM. And so rather than go for 12 gigabytes or opt to go for the 7700 XT and move it from 12 to 16 gigabytes of VRAM, they doubled the 8 gigs of VRAM to 16 gigs for the 7600 XT. So if you're on Linux, you've got a choice of the sub $300 7600 or the just over $300 7600 XT, $50 more for 8 more gigabytes of VRAM. Okay, maybe. Can you use the VRAM for other stuff like AI? Yes, you can. And AMD is a first-class citizen with PyTorch. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But the most impressive thing to me is that where we are in 2024 with Valve and distributions like Pop! OS and Ubuntu and Fedora 39. Yeah, AMD out-of-the-box support for Fedora. Thank you. Very welcome. Because Fedora, well, there's a little bit of a kerfuffle with Red Hat recently. We won't get into that. But Fedora historically has also been a very solid distribution, if a little under the radar for gaming and everything else. For this video, I'm using Pop! OS because it's very solid. I've got my eyes on the Cosmic desktop. I'm pretty excited for that. And because it's basically plug and play. There's a couple of places where it's not exactly perfectly plug and play, but it basically is. And the setup here is really pretty straightforward. If you want to know what to expect on day one, come to the Level 1 forums. Got a little quickie guide for this, but in a nutshell, with AMD GPU, you've got 2 options. The one that's built into the kernel for the drivers, makes it plug and play as long as you're using a relatively recent kernel. This distro actually came with 6.6, which was a little too new for the demonstration that I wanted to do in this video. I actually rolled back to 6.4. I was able to use the mainline package and pick the mainline kernel 6.4, which is probably not ideal because it's missing a lot of patches and updates and things like that. But again, okay for this video. Because the other option you can use is drivers from AMD. AMD offers drivers which have a little bit better integration on the machine learning, the ROCm 6.1 side. Because ROCm, as of version 6, has pretty reasonable support for the 7900 XTX and the 7900 XT. And this GPU, with 16 gigs of VRAM, is accessible. On Windows, Microsoft is pushing their DirectML initiative. On Linux, well, it's a little bit more of a native story with PyTorch. Basically, you can set up ROCm 6 and set up PyTorch, and you're good to go. It's not quite there yet with this GPU, at least in my testing, but it is solidly fully there on Windows with the stuff that's available on the Windows side of things, like the Nod.ai and some of the other DirectML integrations. You can also use a full Vulkan backend with some of those, but gaming on Linux, performance parity. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, this is the exciting thing. You launch Shadow of the Tomb Raider from Steam, nothing special needed. You launch the benchmark, and you're close to performance parity with Windows. It is just a little bit slower, and you can actually do a little bit of tuning and claw that performance back, but that's, again, I'm just looking at the out-of-the-box numbers here. The out-of-the-box numbers, very, very good. Shockingly good. I can't believe that Linux and Windows are basically at performance parity. That is, I never thought I'd see the day. Is it the year of the Linux desktop? Well, I don't know, but somebody inside AMD is doing a lot of work to make sure that Linux is a first-class experience, and it really is with these GPUs. I've got our tiny, completely silent, fractal, small form factor machine with a Minis Forum 13900HX in it. Just pop the GPU in, and that's all I needed to do. And set up a distro from scratch just to make sure nothing strange would happen. And it was basically plug and play. If you notice at the command line that you're missing some firmware, you can update your Linux-firmware package. That should contain the firmware that you need for your graphics driver. Worst case scenario, you can download it from the Linux kernel website or come to the Level 1 forum. This is not a lot different than the walkthroughs that I've done with past GPUs. It's basically plug and play. Shouldn't have any trouble. Let me know if you do. Maybe we can have a write-up or a link below or something like that. But I can't believe it's a first-class experience. The connections on this card from Sapphire, 2 DisplayPort, 2 HDMI. I'm a fan of DisplayPort. I believe the DisplayPort is the superior display interface technology versus HDMI. And so I always want all the DisplayPort. It's like, can I have a gaming GPU with 4 DisplayPort connectors? That always gets my attention. But I get why Sapphire has split 2 DisplayPort and 2 HDMI. It makes sense that they would choose that HDMI. A lot of people are using the 120 hertz OLED TVs. Those are a lot less expensive than displays. I get it. I get why they did that. Okay, it's fine. It is reporting as GFX 1102. It's nice. Should be good. Come to the forums if you're going to use it for AI. We'll run through some more testing. The Docker setup. So with the Docker setup, you install Docker and you use Rockham through the Docker container. It's probably the easiest and most straightforward way to comprehensively test. So with AI out of the way and being a competent Linux gaming experience, top notch I'd say, yeah, there's not really a lot to complain about. I mean, this is 7600 XT. This is, you know, it's not, I don't want to say bottom of stack in terms of GPU performance because we're at over 100 FPS at 1080p gaming. It has reasonable 1440p gaming as well. The 7800 XT is a much better value on Windows when we're talking about gaming in terms of like FPS per dollar, but that's a $500 $550 card. This is about a $330 to $350 card, with the 7600 non-XT being roughly a $280-ish card. Now, other GPUs, other competing GPUs are launching, and so the price landscape here is a little unsteady. The pricing may change. You should always do your own evaluation. But for Linux, AMD is the first-class citizen. So if you're a Linux user and you like using Linux, use Linux as your daily driver, you really can't go wrong with an AMD GPU, especially an RDNA 3 AMD GPU. Now for VFIO, that's something near and dear to my heart. VFIO has been a little hit and miss the last year or two. You have to get your hardware configuration just right. And sometimes you think you've got a GPU that doesn't support the function level reset properly, but you can get it to function level reset anyway if you load a third-party BIOS or you load the BIOS through the EFI initialization routine instead of using the BIOS on the card. It's really strange. Sapphire historically has been the standout for offering VFIO pass-through type use cases because I think they modify their BIOSes for Macs or something. And because of that modification, VFIO tends to be a little bit nicer. I'm not really sure what it is, but you can also just pass through other BIOSes and basically be good to go. There's a lot of guides for that on the Level 1 forum and a little bit of arcana that I'm not sure about. I just haven't quite figured out. But there's a lot of smart people in the Level 1 forums working on AI and working on VFIO pass-through, and a lot of really amazing guys, a lot of really amazing people in the community working really hard to help, sort of document that and make that a little easier for everybody. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And that's pretty much it for this review for the 7600 XT. There's not really a lot to complain about. There's not really a lot more to tell you. It's pretty awesome. 16 gigs. AMD GPU. RDNA 3, so it's the latest and greatest. Card doesn't get super hot. It requires 2 8-pin power connections, 190 watts. Board power starts at 190 watt to 250 watt real world. Wish there was a version of the 7600 XT that had a single 8-pin power connector. That'd be nice because you can pull 75 watts through the slot, but I get why they had to. It's fine. Stability. Makes sense. All right, I'm Modulus Level 1. I'm signing out. You can find me in the Level 1 forums.